Okay then, so as you can see, I've already run npm run dev down here in the terminal, which is spinning up that local development server for us, listening to port 8080 on the local host, which is why we can see it now in the browser. So I'm going to assume that you do this before each lesson, so I don't have to keep on showing you. Then I can just click off this to give us a bit more room. It's always going to be running in the background, so we can always see a live server serving up our application over here. Okay, and when we make a change over here, it's going to update that in the browser automatically. Cool. So a nice simple lesson now to break away from the temporary complexity of what we've been learning over the last few videos. We're going to talk about component CSS. So we know that we have a style tag at the bottom of each component, which we can use to style that component. And we've already created a few styles in the last video for this navigation right here, and they worked. They styled the navbar fine so that it looks something like this in the browser. But now imagine that we had a nav like this in another component. So let's just copy this and go to app.view, and I'd like to place this underneath the navbar component right there. So I'll paste it in. I'm going to scoot this along. I'll take out this menu thing right here, and we have a nav with a UL and some li tags as well. So if we save this now and view this in a browser, then you'll notice that these things right here, these links inside this nav, are styled exactly the same way as these ones. Now that's weird because we only added the CSS for the nav inside the navbar component down here. So I would assume automatically that these styles only apply to these HTML elements over here inside this template, this component. But in actual fact, they're applying to these elements as well, even though we don't style them up down here. So why is that? Well, automatically, Vue.js takes any CSS that we write in any component and it applies those styles site-wide, okay? It doesn't apply them only to that component. Now, what if we want these styles only to apply to this template inside this component? Well, we can do that in a couple of different ways. The first way I'm going to show you is by using the scoped keyword down here on the style tag. So I could do a space, then say scoped, and save this. And what that is going to do is scope these rules right here, these styles, only to this component template. So if I was to view this in a browser now, I'm just going to hard refresh, and then we can see these styles still apply to this navbar component, but they now no longer apply to the app.view component, the root component. Okay, now why is this? Well, if we inspect the element over here, then you're going to notice these weird data attributes associated with each of these elements inside this component. Now, they're not inside this other nav that we have inside the root app.view component. So they're just applied to this component right here, and that's because we said we want our CSS styles to be scoped. So when we say that we want them to be scoped, what Vue does is attach a unique data attribute onto each one of the elements inside that component. So then, in the CSS for that component, what will happen is it will tack on an attribute selector, which is square brackets, and then the attribute name inside, to each one of these rules. So now these rules become nav, then the attribute, nav-ul, then the attribute. So it's only going to style any nav, or nav-ul, or nav-li, which has this attribute on the element. Now, because only the navbar elements have that and not the root app.view elements, it's only now styling these ones. So we've scoped our styles just to this component. Now, although this is easy to do, it's not my preferred way of working to scope styles to a component because it's not as efficient as just regular CSS. When we do this right here, what we're doing is we're actually changing all of our CSS rules and we're adding on all of those attributes to the elements. It's not as efficient as just creating regular CSS without having to do all this. So another way, and more kind of logical way really, is just to add on a class, for example, main nav, like so, and then just styling up this class. So you could do nav.main-nav, and that's going to do the same thing. As long as you don't use that class anywhere else in a different component, it's only going to style up this nav, the main nav. Okay, so then that is scoped CSS. Again, not my preferred way of doing things, but I thought I ought to let you know in case that's what you want to do.